of those out at the outreach table if you have not gotten one yet. On a more serious note, I want you to be in prayer for Jo Moody. She lost her mother this week. Sarah lost someone in her family. Keep people surrounded here. Remember Judy, who's in the hospital, still recovering. Keep these folks knowing that they're not alone in those spaces. All right? A number of years ago, Eric Bazillion did what many of us do. He wrote a song to try and impress a girl. Have you done that?
Yep.
Try to impress somebody, write it out, and try to say, here's how I'm going to sing. And he said it worked, because she's his wife and they have 2 kids together. It was a little bit better than the roses are red, violets are blue that I tried. But it's not quite a love song either. It goes like this. What if God was one of us? Just a slob like one of us. Just a stranger on the bus trying to make his way home. Remember that song? Joan Osborne took it and turned it into an amazing hit that we all heard. And it calls that question into our heart about how is God present around us? And the problem with that question is that we look at it 2 different ways. Theologically, I look at it and say, yep, I agree, God is right there all around me, and I can theologically acknowledge God in each of you. And then there's the practical side of things, where I have to figure out in this moment, in this situation, in this whatever it is that's going on, how it is that God is present in you. It's that knock on the door from our call to awareness, and we have all those things that get in the way. Those excuses, those obstacles, that distance sometimes between us. And we have to figure out what to do about all that. So I want you to take just a second and think about some of the reasons why you don't listen to some people. What it is that stands in your way of being able to see God in them. What it is that makes it so it's difficult for you to hear God's voice through them. How is it? What stands in the way? What is it that makes it difficult for you? God's knock always comes, and we sometimes don't hear it, and it's not because the vibrations don't hit our eardrums. It's because there's something else that stands in the way. Some space in there, some excuse, some rationale, some delay tactic that makes it so the vibrations don't quite reach our hearts. And like in the call to awareness, we say, wait a while, they'll go away. Wait a while, they'll go away. But I'm so thankful for all the people who say yes in whatever way they say yes. And so I want to acknowledge somebody who did that. Marty, will you stand up here for a second? Come on. How many know that Marty had lots of good reasons to say no? our administrative coordinator. And yet she said yes, she chose to hear us, she chose to bless us, she chose to be in this space where she's going to take on lots of stuff. But here's the good news, she's going to return the favor and she's going to call you lots. Because she's not going to do the administration, she's going to coordinate the administration. And so she's going to need you to listen to her voice calling you from across the sea, right? And calling you to do something. And so can we bless her as we as she steps into this role? met me might call her St. Maria. That was somebody else's suggestion. When I was a kid, we had a rule at our house that if the phone rang, somebody answered it. Makes sense, doesn't it? Especially because I grew up in that time, you know, when it was like caveman telephones, where there weren't such things as caller ID or answering machines. Now, today, you know, we all have these phones that will tell me who's calling, and I can look at and decide whether or not I want to listen to them. Decide whether or not I want to talk to them. And in fact, in some ways, the only time I really take live calls on my phone is when I'm in a boring meeting. But it's real simple, isn't it? To use all those things as a screening device. Not just our phones, but our lives. To try to figure out who it is we choose to listen to and who we choose not to listen to. Which knocks on the door we go and answer, which invitations in the mail we do something about, which people we choose to hear and let them affect us. And it's because we have these neatly ordered lives, and all those other voices make us have to look beyond our ordering, the way we've set it up, the way we think it should work. And those other voices say, yeah, look a little bigger, a little different than what you're thinking. My favorite type of game to play on a computer is called an RPG game, a role-playing game. And at their best, this is what they are. It's this big world laid out in front of you, and you have to go discover. You have to go explore, you have to go find, and you have to figure out how to collect different things to be able to get the strength and the ability to be able to move forward in a game. And the problem with that is that there's sometimes those things you need to collect have like a shining light over, oh yeah, that's something I need. And then there's the other stuff that just looks like most of the other things. And you have to figure out, do I need this? Do I not need it? And sometimes those other things sometimes lead you in these places that get you all caught up in where you don't want to go. But you have to figure out, you have to discern how to hear this common, everyday, ordinary thing and see it as something bigger and better than that. Something that will help you to move forward and become what you can become. And the challenge is that those clues are not much different. So how do we hear? How do we listen? And how do we end up not becoming confused or following incorrectly? That song about What If God Was One of Us was the theme song to a show that aired for a couple of years back in the early 90s. It was called Joan of Arcadia. Remember that show? Joan came to a new city, and she had to figure out her way there. And the beginning story had to do with her brother, where her brother was in a car accident and was laying in the hospital, and she was worried, and she did the same type of thing that often comes out of our hearts. She looks up and goes, God, if you just save him, then. Well, what happens is that then God starts using her. God starts talking to her. God starts calling out to her from a number of different places and asks her to become something or do something. And what I love is the types of ways that God speaks. Here's some of the names that God uses. The little girl God, the majorette God, the geek, the exchange student, the chess player, the video assignment, or one of my favorites, the three-card Monty God. That was played by Will.i.am. And all these different people speak to her in a number of different ways and ask her to do some different things, and they're challenging very often. One of the most difficult is when the voice asked her to go to the dance with this bully. this loner man who she didn't want to go with. Nobody wanted to go with. He was on the outside, and yet there it was. You're supposed to go and take him to the dance. And her mother was against it. Assistant principal was against it. They're all fighting her about that, but she by this time learned to hear that voice and follow, even if she didn't understand. And so off she went to the dance with him. And as they're there, she discovers he's got a bottle of alcohol in his pocket. And she knows that that's not what he should do, that's against the rules, and if he gets caught, then she helps him to leave it in his pocket. But it wasn't quite enough, because that assistant principal, who already didn't like this kid, discovers it, confiscates it, takes him out of the dance and expels him from school. Which leaves Joan sitting there saying, well, what good did I do? How did I help? What happened? And that voice comes back to kind of help explain, which it doesn't always do in the show, but it does in this instance. And it talks to her and lets her know that, you see, he had something else concealed. Not just the alcohol, but he also had a gun. Ooh. And he was going to that dance to use the gun in difficult, challenging ways. And her being there allowed that not to happen. Her listening to that call allowed something she couldn't even understand to become the truth. And sometimes that's the challenge, isn't it? Is that we don't always know what it is that this voice is calling us to. We see the immediate, but we don't see the effects of it. And so it's easy for us to not understand. Especially, as what happens with Joan, that voice keeps coming in a number of different guises. Some of them that we don't understand well. Things like that little girl God. Can we hear a little girl speaking to us and hear the voice of God? Or that geek that we're not quite sure we want to listen to because he's different or out of the norm. And yet maybe God's right there. See, the Spirit speaks to us in that same way. In a wonderful diversity of voices. And they're not always the easy ones we want, the ones where over here I hear it, and I hear God's voice really easily there. Sometimes there's the voice over here that I don't know, or I'm not sure I want to know. That's so distant that I can't quite even hear it, let alone understand it. Or that's confusing to me because it clashes with some other voice of God that I have. How can I hear this voice too? And so it's so easy for us when we hear that knock on the door to close our ears and ignore this new voice, especially if it's a challenge of how to go from here to there and how to cross the Aegean Sea to get to Macedonia. But all of Joan's voices had a last name, all of them, and they shared that last name. You had the officious hall monitor God, the woman with cats God, the skinny kid God, the punk girl God, and maybe my favorite, the East Indian sunglasses salesman God. All of those voices are God's voices. They just come in different guises that sometimes confuse us or bewilder us or make it so that we're not quite sure. But we believe that God speaks out of all these different voices, right? We believe that God is somehow in them, and can I hear that voice of God, especially when the guises sometimes make it so I don't want to, don't understand how to, or confuse me. So there's Paul, doing good work over here in Asia, and here's the voice to go over to Europe. He begins a journey. And it's the same journey that today is being made by Syrian refugees. Refugees that are calling out to the world in God's voice saying, can you hear what's going on? Can we, in their voice of need, hear God present? It's the same voice that calls out from our border. People saying, I need help. I need you to see and hear this voice of God. Can you? Or do we just build a bigger wall? And it calls out from the streets of our city. And hungry people that are saying, can you hear the voice of God in me and come and help and be here and be a presence for me? And it calls out from our schools, kids that are saying, we need someone to be here with us, to hear us, to understand us, to help us move forward. It calls out in the voice of folks that right now need someone to be by their side as they struggle with death or the challenge of life. That voice of God continually calls out in all kinds of different guises. Can we hear all of those voices? And can we listen and follow where they lead? And it's the same voice that has called these folks to General Conference. I got to tell you, that's a voice of God that scares me, because I remember 4 years ago, it was a scary General Conference. We were at each other's throats in so many ways. And we weren't hearing very easily that voice of God. And I wonder what's going to happen this year. Can we listen? Can we hear? Can we be that voice of God for each other? And I don't know how, but I'm so glad for Winifred and all those from our church that are going there. And part of what they're going to go do is they're going to go be part of the Love Your Neighbor Coalition. I just like that name too. It's a group of Methodists from all different places with all different kinds of concerns that have come together to say, most importantly, we need to figure out how to love each other. And part of what they're going to do, especially during the first week, is they are going to be there just offering water, offering ways to be able to guide people around the city, to help them to be able to acclimatize from where they were to this space. They're going up to Portland, Oregon, which is a foreign country for some of you. Right? Yeah. And they've got to figure out how to get there and be there and live there. And that's part of what's going to happen. And I'm so proud of all of you guys that are going to be there to help them to do that. And then they're going to put on their stoles during the second week and say, okay, you know me as that friendly face who helped me. Can you also know me and hear me as this person who might be opposed to you in some of the places? Can we still listen to each other? Can we still be together? Can we still hear the voice of God in each other as we speak about some of the issues that might divide us? Isn't that important to be able to do? Isn't that amazing work that these folks are doing? So thank you to you that are going. Be in prayer for them, because it won't be simple work. It won't always be the work that'll bring immediate perfect results. And be in prayer for those that are going to be the voice of God in their lives, and for the ones that need to hear them as the voice of God in their lives. Help them to be able to be even more wonderfully successful in all of this.
Amen.
Eric Bazillion. I came across not because he wrote that song about what if God was one of us, but because he was part of one of my favorite groups. And the name of them was the Hooters. And they played wonderful music. And one of their songs was a song that was an old song written by Hetty Lee. And it was about 500 miles. If you miss the train I'm on, you'll know that I am gone.
Yeah.
Because you can hear the whistle blow 100 miles. And they put a new verse onto it. It's the verse that I love the best. It's about a man who heard the voice of God speaking in a very different way. And it said this: 100 tanks along the square. One man stands and stops them there. Someday soon the tide will turn and I'll be free. Do Do you remember that man standing in Tiananmen Square, hearing the voice of God in that tank? The tank God. Where he stood, not necessarily in opposition, but in a space that was firm and said, I'm going to be here. Can we relate? You remember how he moved as the tank moved? He said, I'm going to be right here. Can you hear the voice of God in me? And can I see the presence of God in you? And it changed the world, didn't it? And if we let it, it will continue to change us. If we let it penetrate us. If we can hear, if we can see, if we can become what it is it calls us to be. The problem is we got to get through all those day-to-day voices that call out to us so much easier. Because it's not always simple to hear the tank God that calls us to go stand out there in that space that leaves us vulnerable. Or that God that calls us to be with someone that we don't know or understand, and yet to be there in that vulnerable space. And yet that's the God that calls out to us on a regular basis. And we have to put aside all that stuff that are the other voices, the one that say, oh, go fill up your gas tank. Oh, go pay your bills. Oh, go do the everyday stuff of life. And we got to hear this voice that calls us across the Aegean Sea to something. Calls us away from what we have been towards what God wants us to become. But isn't it great to hear how Paul said that immediately as they heard that voice, they began to put things together so they could cross and go become. There's an apocryphal story about Jesus going up to heaven after he finishes everything done over here. And he's all beaten and battered by life, by all the things that didn't happen the way that we would have set him up. And while there, he talks to the archangel Michael. Michael's going, well, how'd it go down there? You look a little beat up. You look like it wasn't quite perfect for you. How'd it go? Well, not perfect. You had lots of people listening to you, though, didn't you? Well, there were 12 of them who kind of listened. And then Peter didn't quite listen at the end. He denied that he knew me. And of course, Judas, he betrayed me. And those other guys, they ran away. Well, what do you mean? Well, what are you going to do now? Well, I think that they're going to go and do something. I think that they'll come back and that they'll start talking and they'll start sharing and something's going to happen. And Michael looks at him. He doesn't have much belief in that plan. So, are you sure about that? Have you got no other plans? And Jesus says, no, I have no other plans. I'm depending on them. Or maybe I should say, I'm depending on you. To hear that voice, to let it penetrate you, and help you become that voice. That's what this communion is about. It's about finding that bit of strength in the midst of all the things that say you can't, but to hear why it is you can. So you take a bit of bread, you dip it in a bit of juice, and you remind yourself to listen again. You remind yourself that God is present, even in this little thing that doesn't look at all like God. So here's the broken bread God, calling you to be something. Here's the little bit of juice, God. Here's the presence of God here for us, reminding us to go from here out there to listen to all those other ways that God is going to speak, all those other ways that Spirit is going to enter our hearts, all those other places where we're going to be able to hear the voice of God if we choose to hear it. Will my servers please come forward? By the way, you'll notice that many of these servers are the same people whom we just honored and who are going to General Conference. And so I invite you to, as you receive from them, to also bless them as they go on their way. help them to know that they do not go alone.